Bună ziua! Onorată asistență, stimați invitați, stimați colegi, mă bucur mult să salut la Guvernului misiunea UNECE la cele două mase rotundă, cadrul proiectului Studiu subregional pentru politici de inovare și prezentarea primului concluzii de evaluării politicilor de inovare în Republica Moldova. Cu această ocazie doresc să aduc sincer mulțumiri Comisiei Economice a Organizației Natiunilor Unite pentru Europa, cât și Guvernul Suediei cu suportul căruia are loc acest eveniment, și altor parteneri prezenți în sală pentru suportul în activitățile care desfășoară Ministerul Educatiei, Culturii și Cercetarii. În același rând, să mulțumesc tuturor pentru prezență și interesul pe care au manifestat și care va contribui la desfășurarea acestui studiu, care cu siguranță va impulsiona activitățile ce țin de proiectul inovațional de Republica Moldova. Este important de menționat că această inițiativă vine în susținerea efortului Guvernului Republicii Moldova pentru dezvoltarea domeniilor cercetării și inovării, domenii pe care Ministerul Educatiei, Culturii și Cercetării gestionează economia cu o deosebită responsabilitate și atenție. În acest context doresc să accentuez angajamentul ferm al Guvernului în vederea îmbunătățirii guvernanței și sporirii eficienței domeniilor cercetării și inovării, inclusiv în vederea abordării lucrurilor necesității socioeconomice ale statului. Asta odată cu aprobarea proiectului concurs privind integrarea Republicii Moldova în spațiul european de cercetare, a programului național în domeniul cercetării și inovării naționale 2020-2023 și a metodologiei de finanțare a proiectelor din domeniul cercetării și inovării, dar și cu suportul partenerilor internaționali, precum UNECE, Guvernul avansează la promovarea productivității și competitivității. Doresc să-mi exprim convingerea că rezultatele acestui studiu vor contribui atât la identificarea punctelor forte, cât și a celor slabe din domeniul supus evaluării, culminând cu recomandări valoroase în vederea îmbunătățirii cadrului de politici, dar și consolidării unui ecosistem favorabil dezvoltării proiectelor de inovare din Republica Moldova. Vă urez tuturor succes în această activitate. Și acum aș vrea să ofer cuvântul pentru un mesaj de salut domnului Simon Springet, coordonator rezident al Organizației Natiunilor Unite în Republica Moldova. Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Topala, and a very good morning to everyone. On behalf of the United Nations country team, I'm delighted to be here today for this Innovation Stakeholder Roundtable. I would like to begin by acknowledging the commitment from the Ministry of Education, Culture and Research and the National Institute for Economic Research, and of course the continuous generous support from the Government of Sweden. I would also like to thank our colleagues from the UNECE for their work and support in this process. Innovation is essential for us to deliver at the scale and pace needed to achieve both national and global development ambitions, the SDGs. We must all work together, government, industries, academia, and civil society, to develop the frameworks and systems that facilitate and enable innovation. We need to share ideas, push boundaries, and move faster. And we must harness the opportunities brought by innovation. An important step in this direction is the reason why we are here today. And I'm very glad that the Republic of Moldova is included in these two important initiatives, the Innovation Policy Outlook and the Innovation for Sustainable Development Review. Assessments of innovation performance show that there is a broad awareness and recognition of the importance of innovation for the future growth and competitiveness of the Republic of Moldova. In this context, I am also commending the commitment of the Moldovan government to include innovation in its draft National Development Strategy, the Moldova Vision 2030, as well as the current Government Action Plan 2020-2023. Both documents make significant reference to the importance of innovation across all sectors. Today, the initial presentation of the findings for Moldova of the Innovation for Sustainable Development Review further supports that commitment. Once again, on behalf of the United Nations country team, I extend our continued support and I wish you a very productive conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Springet. Acum vreau să ofer cuvântul doamnei Perciun, Rudica, șef secție cercetări financiare și monetare, Institutul Național de Cercetări Economice.
Mulțumesc mult! Bună ziua, stimată audiență, onorată asistență. Vreau și eu să salut pe prezența dumneavoastră la această masă rotundă. N-am să mă opresc prea mult asupra rolului și impactului inovațiilor, asupra dezvoltării societății, dezvoltării economice. El este deja demonstrat și iminent. Ceea ce vreau să spun că pentru așa țări ca Republica Moldova, cu economie emergentă și respectiv resurse naturale limitate, activitatea inovațională de fapt este una din acele căi de soluționare și asigurare a creșterii economice sustenabile. Iar rolul statului prin politicile sale și instrumentele sale este de a asigura această stimulare a activității inovaționale. De aceea, Institutul Național de Cercetări Economice, în calitate de instituție științifică de cercetare specializată în domeniul cercetărilor economice, a răspuns inițiativei experților internaționali de a participa la această evaluare a situației în domeniul vizat. În calitatea noastră de punct național focal, misiunea noastră a fost una mai puțin importantă, dar foarte semnificativă, de a asigura acel suport și ajutor Ministerului Educației, Cercetării, Culturii și Cercetării. Și rolul nostru a constat de a sistematiza informația pe care am primit-o în urma chestionarilor, am primit-o de la dumneavoastră. Pe această cale vreau să mulțumesc tuturor participanților, respondenților care au răspuns la aceste chestionare și ne-au permis nouă să evaluăm acest tablou instituțional a Republicii Moldova în domeniul politicilor inovaționale. Noi vreau să vă mulțumesc și să vă doresc dezbateri fructuoase. Să ne dorim tuturor. Mulțumesc mult!
Mulțumim, doamna Perciun. Și acum vreau să ofer cuvântul domnului Anders Johnson, șef secție dezvoltarea politicilor de inovare, Comisia Economică a Organizației Natiunilor Unite pentru Europa. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. It's a pleasure to be here again. We were here last time in September to start the research process for the innovation policy outlook, and I'm impressed by the number of participants that our dear counterparts have been able to assemble here today. So thank you very much for today, and I welcome everyone to this event. We have two objectives that we want to do, two major objectives, or two major activities that we're doing with Moldova from our side, in addition to several other parts of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, which are also working with Moldova in other areas, such as trade and regulatory barriers and transport and urban development. The first is to discuss the results of the research of the Innovation Policy Outlook, which is a sub-regional attempt to compare, contrast, and assess the scope and quality of innovation policies and institutions and processes. So not as much what your innovation inputs and outputs are, but actually how your institutions and policies work to improve and to intermediate and to create what we call a vibrant national innovation system. The second, which de facto follows up on the results of the IPO, is to do an in-depth national review. We call them Innovation for Sustainable Development National Reviews, which we put out at about the rate of one per year, where we have a methodology that we're continuously upgrading and improving. We're just finishing now the review for Georgia. And this process would start pretty much now based on the initial results that we have from the IPO, and we'll go through a little bit in more detail what that means. But this is an opportunity for us to take a much more in-depth look at what is happening in Moldova, and specifically to look into a couple of questions that might be of interest to you. It might be science-business linkages, it might be free economic zones or economic diversification, or something else. Is one of the things that we're going to present and discuss today. So these are two major activities that we're combining into one mission, and that's why so many of my colleagues are here today. I would, of course, especially like to thank the Ministry of Education, the Secretary General, our focal points from the Department for Research and Innovation, Alyona Onofrey and Olga Tretikov, also from the NER, the Research Institute, Rudika Parchun, who has also been with us more or less from the beginning when we started this IPO project. Also the State Chancellery, also of course my colleagues who are here today. We have Ralph Heinrich and Chris Athay here who are working on the review. We have Jacob, who is leading on the innovation policy outlook, and of course we have Stephanie and Dimitri, and of course our Moldovan colleague Tatiana, which I cannot see right now, who has been essential in organizing this meeting. So with that, I'd like to welcome everyone, and I hope that this will be a productive session. Thank you. So, yeah. So back to me. I'm just going to do a quick presentation. When we publish the IPO and when we do the I4SD review, the Innovation for Sustainable Development review, the starting point is always to take a look at the current economic situation, in particular the economic structure, because we have to keep in mind that when we say innovation, we basically mean anything that is new to the context, to the sector, and to the economy, not necessarily based on research, not necessarily based on technology, although they would, most good ideas use technology well, but it's not necessarily what we think of when we say things like high-tech startups. It could be anything that's new to the economy, something relatively banal like a wine seller setting up a brand abroad. It's something, if it hasn't been done before, it's new, it's innovation. So it's actually tightly connected with other buzzwords that you might have heard, such as economic diversification, which I think is a priority in Moldova, and I'll explain a little bit. Why. Can I have the next slide? So. You all know what happened after Moldova gained independence. There was a relatively sharp fall in GDP, and pretty remarkable. One of the most remarkable compared to other countries we worked on, deindustrialization. Now, of course, you know the reason for this. The vertical supply chains were interrupted. Especially the connections with research institutions were interrupted. Of course, there was also the Transnistrian conflict, where a lot of the industrial capacity was placed, and of course there was some questions about the competitiveness when exposed to external market competition of these industrial activities. So there was a sharp decline, and slowly the economy started to reorient itself towards first services, and then domestic consumption, and then also some upgrading on the agricultural side. That's when GDP then slowly started to recover, but it took quite a bit to reach the levels of 1990. Of course, for economists, it's sometimes very hard to interpret the data from the Soviet Union correctly because they were not based on market prices. So we have to take all of these assumptions a little bit with a grain of salt. But I think we all agree with this overall picture. There was a sharp drop in the 90s and then a gradual recovery after that, but characterized by quite a bit of fluctuations. And I think we also know the reasons for this. There's a relatively high reliance on remittances. They fluctuate. Of course, when the ruble crisis came, there was a sharp drop, and of course also a reliance on the prices of agricultural commodities. They also fluctuate. So, based on the structure that we have, it's not a surprise that we have these fluctuations in growth, and it's one of the things that's important to look at when we do this review is to find some of the sources that could stabilize or at least compensate for some of these inevitable fluctuations, to find basically new drivers of growth. Next slide. If we look at exports by product and export by partners, there are a couple of things which are pretty clear, which are relevant for the analysis that we want to do. There's a relative stronger reliance on CIS countries and Romania. There's a growing share of exports to other countries in the EU. But again, when you look at the products that are being exported, it tends to be commodities. And again, for commodities, first of all, you cannot make a lot of money. Second of all, you're going to be subject to price fluctuations. And third, of course, the EU has a very strong agricultural policy, so that might actually make competing even more difficult. So this is already not a stable situation. There are a couple of exceptions to this. There are a couple of products where Moldova is actually doing very well. So one of the things that we can do as part of this exercise is to look at, can we develop more niches like that, or can we develop those niches further, because it's important. If you look at FDI, you see a lot of fluctuations too, and not a lot of diversification in terms of sources. A lot of it's coming from Russia and Romania. Obviously, I read one statistics that 80% of it is going into free economic zones. We don't know if that's a good thing or not a good thing, but it's important to think about what are these free economic zones for. If they are much more attractive than the rest of the economy, then can we think about taking some of the things that are attractive about the free economic zones and spreading them to the rest of the economy. It's about FDI stock is about $870 per capita. This is below the regional benchmark. In Georgia, it's over 3,000. So that's good. And Georgia is also a resource-poor country, so there should be quite a bit of potential of attracting investment, especially because of your good relations with Romania and Russia, and also your DCFTA with the EU. There should be people waiting at the door to invest, because there are opportunities here, and wages are still relatively moderate, and you can have relatively good access to both the EU and the Russian market. So this should be possible. So let's look at what we can do in that respect from an innovation angle. Another issue is that if you look at the things that you are exporting, you have an economic, one way of measuring this is economic complexity, which is basically a way of capturing, or an indirect way of capturing the uniqueness or the value added of your products. That you're 59th in the world, but that if you remove some of the most competitive products, it's actually much less than that. So let's have a look at what's happening in that area. Of course, one story that we've heard and that we would like to look into is what happened in one of your free economic zones, where something like a relatively dynamic automotive supply sector emerged based on the investment of a German company that then led to suppliers, and these suppliers then developed capacities and were able to export to other customers. This, of course, is the kind of dynamic, if it's true, we still have to look into it, but this of course, is the kind of dynamic that innovation policy should try to build up. Next slide. Oh, no, stay on this one. Employment by type of economic activity. Here, what's striking here is that we see, and we've seen several different figures, so we weren't really sure which ones to take. But 40% employment in agriculture is actually quite a bit, and then in addition, you have to consider that about 50% of industrial production is dependent on agricultural input. So this is 50% of employment that's more or less dependent on the vicissitudes of a highly volatile international market, because you're trading mostly in commodities, with a few exceptions. However, the productivity of these activities tend to be less than half of the GDP average, and much less than manufacturing. I'm not going to give you the figures here because I found them pretty striking, so I'm not really sure if they're correct. But this tends to be true about agriculture in general. But if you look just at this figure, you have one of the highest employments in agriculture of all CIS countries. As you know, in Western Europe, we would expect figures of maybe 2 or 3%. In Belarus, which has a relatively strong agricultural sector, is still less than 10%. So it's quite a bit. And we need to understand why this is. This might be a symptom of not enough opportunities being available elsewhere. At the same time, we hear that many companies are screaming out for labor. So we need to understand a little bit what the dynamic is here. Overall, in general, if you look at productivity growth, the overall picture is that for about the past 15 years, what Moldova has been able to do well is to reallocate resources from less capital-intensive to more capital-intensive activities. And we don't know yet how this squares with what we just saw in the employment figures in agriculture, but at the aggregate level, this is what we see. What has been much less or even negative is within sector productivity growth, which is basically innovation. Basically doing what you already do more efficiently, or in a way that you add more value to it. At the aggregate level, this has been 0 or negative for the past 15 years, and this needs to change, because there's only so much that you can do by reallocating resources from less productive to more productive areas. And this inevitably involves some kind of innovation, not maybe the kind of frontier innovation that we have in mind, not necessarily the sexy startups, but basically doing what you're already doing more efficiently. And I think one of the things that we do notice in Moldova, as you know, it's one of the most intensive, energy-intensive production structure among all CIS countries. It might be a sign of basically many companies basically using more or less the same technology that has been around, or existing installations for a long time, and not upgrading it, maybe because they see the risk as being too large and things like that. So we should look into that. Next slide. I'll go quickly so we can. At the same time, if you look at innovation outputs, one of the main issues that keeps coming up is the declining number of school graduates and also the quality of education. And this is of course a pity because you used to be one of the leading countries in the world at about the time of independence. And it's important to retain this legacy, and same with your legacy and research. I read statistics of between 10 and 30,000 researchers working in Moldova in about the mid 80s. I know you retain some of this legacy, but it's important to keep it alive and to use it better and to actually and to work on commercializing, both on commercializing things that are happening in your research institutes, but also making sure that your research institutes are solving problems in the private sector, not necessarily the private sector here. It could also be of investors. It could be of the private sector elsewhere. So that's one of the things that we would like to look at. On the ease of doing business, the overall picture is that some of the easy things you have done, but most of the hard things still remain to do. So it's relatively easy to make it easier to register a business. For instance, it's you can do some process mapping, you get a consultant, and then we've seen this in many countries. But if you look at things like the quality of judicial processes, the rule of law, of course, perceptions of corruption, not necessarily corruption itself, but perceptions of corruptions, and it's 121st out of 170 countries. Of course, some of this might come from the banking scandal that you had a couple of years ago. This is, from a perceptions perspective, this takes a while to get out of. There's a relatively low level of trust in institutions. About 20% of Moldovans say that they trust institutions, and you need this trust to be able to be effective. Of course, this is outside the realm of what we can do in our review. But keep in mind what we want to help you with is to make sure that what the government does is as effective as possible, and this is more or less one of the prerequisites for this. There's been quite a bit of Moldova is a relatively open economy. Of course, now also with the DCFTA, you were the first country to enter the WTO. I mean, congratulations on that. That's quite an achievement. It's not an easy process coming out with the Soviet legacy. But if you look at the heritage freedom, you're still not performing that well because in areas like rule of law and judicial independence, that pulls down your ranking. So these are very important things to watch, and this is also one of the reasons why there is only a suboptimal level of investment into the economy, which, as we've seen in the previous indicators, is necessary. Also, of course, the tax system. There are some areas of tax system and labor regulation which discourages employment, which discourages risk-taking. It's important to have a look at that as well in this context. I'll skip the next slide, and I'll just make a couple of conclusions as they are relevant to the analysis that we want to do. We've seen a relatively undiversified structure with low average, what we call product sophistication, and many of the product areas which were relatively highly sophisticated have declined substantially, have disappeared. You actually used to be a relatively diversified country, especially compared to other countries at the same level of economic development at the time of independence, which is good news because it's much easier to reawaken what you used to be able to do than to create all of those capacities from scratch. So especially things like machine these are complex areas that if you want to build them completely anew, it's much more. It's going to be it's going to be much more difficult. Another issue which keeps coming up is which is a boon and a bane, is labor migration and dependency on remittances, which by some measures is about 30% of GDP, which means that you need them. Your economy would crumble if there are substantial fluctuations in remittance inflows. This is not good for macroeconomic stability. It's not good because you're able to sustain a substantial trade deficit for a long time, and imbalances will inevitably build up as a result. Remittances also tend to go to funding imports because they're sent to families, and families tend to buy products that are mostly abroad. Plus, of course, some domestic services. But it's unlikely to fund investment into export-intensive, highly sophisticated products. I think at the same time there is quite a bit of potential here. You have I forget the exact number, maybe 1 million Moldovans that work abroad. These are people with connections. Many of these are people with skills. And there have been many good examples of countries that have taken very concerted measures to bring them back, either as entrepreneurs or as skilled workers, or to at least to the service and as an intermediary. That's one of the things that we might want to look into in one of the in-depth chapters that we want to do in the review. How can you use the diaspora to drive innovation? The investment climate. Of course, you're an open economy, but some of the institutional and rule of law aspects are and some of the labor regulations are still very likely to actually deter investment into industrial production overall, and innovation in particular, because keep in mind, innovation is already risky by itself. If you face additional risks because of the investment climate, that's going to be even more of a deterrence, which is why you see so much of the investment, especially domestic investment, going into things like intermediation, or what I would call the transaction sectors, which is basically trade. Then, of course, a very strong legacy of research, both basic and applied research, which is a very important legacy to retain. Same for education. You've seen quite a decline of educational quality, and also especially educational graduates in MINT areas. It's important to see how we can reverse that decline. There are some spots of lights. There's the wine sector, the IT services sector, maybe the auto parts sectors. It's important to have a look at how can we develop these further, and where there's been a positive dynamic, how can we replicate that dynamic, especially in view of the immense opportunities that you have as the EU DCFTA is implemented. And finally, there's an issue with the competitiveness of domestic markets, which is also essential for innovation. Remember, innovation is based on a system of profit and loss. If companies are not being productive, they need to be phased out, and you need to try out something else until you have an economic structure which is useful for long-term sustainable development. Of course, SOEs are have assets of about 33% of GDP, which is already quite bitten by some measures. More than half of manufacturing markets are not competitive, and this is an important element for innovation to be able to thrive. So these are things that is the starting point for the analysis that my colleagues will present, and we very much look forward to working with Moldova on this, and it's a pleasure for all of us to be here. Thank you very much.
Okay. Switch this off, or? It works? Okay, yes. So I will be your moderator for the rest of this morning. So the next item on the agenda is the presentation on the National Innovation for Sustainable Development Review, and that will be done by my colleague Chris Athay. Please.
Well, thank you very much. I'm just going to present on the planned Innovation for Sustainable Development Review of Moldova. If I could get the next slide. Yep. Just to give some background, this is a long-established program of national innovation policy reviews. They were initially called Innovation Performance Reviews, and obviously with Agenda 2030 we've updated the methodology and mainstreamed sustainable development considerations. The countries to have received reviews are Belarus, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Armenia, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan and Georgia, which we're in the process of finalising. And Belarus actually recently received a second stage review to assess progress since the first review. We do these reviews upon requests of member states, so this is upon the request of the government of Moldova, and they're subject to extra budgetary funding. So in this case, from SIDA, the Swedish International Development Agency, and one of the key changes when we upgraded the methodology, obviously you know that Agenda 2030 it enables countries to identify their national priorities. So in the reviews we now include elective chapters where we agree focus topics with the government to reflect national policy priorities. We have our own in-house analytical capacity, also in relation to the innovation policy outlook, which we will come to later, and we assemble a team of international experts with the relevant expertise on the focus topics, and have fact-finding missions and then peer review of the main findings and policy recommendations, and all this will be in consultation with national stakeholders, obviously largely the people in this room, and perhaps some others that we will identify as we progress with the review. Next slide, please. Yes, so just to remind about Agenda 2030, obviously economic growth is only one pillar of sustainable development. The others are environmental sustainability and social inclusion. We also look to mainstream gender considerations in the review methodology. And we're also aware that Moldova has its voluntary national review coming up in July this year, so we also keep that in mind, and look at we also aware you have your Vision 2030, the action plan for 2020 to 2023 of government priorities for reform. So we keep those things in mind as part of the wider sustainable development agenda. Next slide, please. This is just the background. We focus on recommendations to stimulate innovation activity, enhance innovation capacity, and improve the overall efficiency of the national innovation system. So that includes public sector, private sector, academia. We take the national innovation system view, and I think we've already discussed the methods of work. So if I could get the next slide. So obviously we have quite a long period of experience on these reviews since they were first initiated in 2010. One of our, in contrast perhaps to some other international organisations, we very much take an innovation for development perspective. So we look at opportunities for leapfrogging, or let's say learning from other countries. Obviously there's a lot of knowledge out there. You don't have to develop all of the ideas yourself or reinvent the wheel. Knowledge diffusion from abroad, as Anders Jonsson mentioned, very important when you have a large diaspora. There's a lot of scope there for modernising the economy. And also looking at grassroots innovation and agriculture obviously is important in Moldova as well. we've seen these challenges in a lot of countries, low levels of funding for R&D. So it's obviously a big challenge to keep R&D funding as a policy priority. That's been the case in most of the countries that we've worked on. Obviously, there are a range of social priorities, political priorities, but research and development has very long-term payoffs. It's important to keep that in mind. Investment in infrastructure, and again, the challenges of loss of qualified research professionals is a big challenge. There's also the way that the wider world is changing. Collaboration is more and more important. If you look at the leading international research publications, the number of collaborators, it can be quite enormous on some scientific papers. So it's not enough to just have a few good people, but also to focus on connections with other countries. Again, the growing importance of international linkages, and also the linkages with private sector, between the research sector, academia, and private sector. This is really crucial. Next slide, please. The structure of the reviews are part one, which includes the focus on economic development, looking at the innovation performance, some of which has already been touched upon in presentation, so we already start to do some work on this. We then have a second part which looks at the national innovation system, and as I said, also the connections, not just the components of the national innovation system and innovation governance. And then part three is 2 to 3 in-depth chapters on specific topics, and we also look at having an action plan for reforms based on recommendations in the review. If possible, we do this during the review, or there can be support after the review to help to finalise such an action plan, which we recently worked on with Kyrgyzstan. Next slide. Obviously, we need to confirm timings for sure, but at the moment, obviously, we're in the preparation and country engagement stage. We tentatively could put this as the first quarter of this year. We'll also be conducting research on national innovation system and innovation governance in second quarter, and then obviously, subject to agreeing in-depth topics, we would look to be carrying that out from around July to September, depending on availability of the international experts, when it would be possible to come to Moldova and conduct the interviews that we need. There's obviously also a process of consolidation and validation of results. This should include a peer review process, which we would aim to take place in Moldova. And obviously a final stage when we finalise the publication and actually launch the review. Obviously, that we tentatively time that for early 2021, but we would expect to have the key policy recommendations already available before then, which we could already share with the government. So we would hope to make our findings available on an ongoing basis. Next slide, please. On this, we have to thank our colleagues in the UN Resident Coordination Office who helped us to look at the current action plan of reform for the government. Obviously, there have been some political changes, priorities can change, but these are a few of the upcoming reform priorities that look to be particularly relevant for innovation policy in the country. There's a range of activity on smart specialisation strategies. We understand there's already been a process of public-private dialogue, as it's called, entrepreneurial discovery, with an objective to kind of have these smart specialisation strategies developed during the course of the year ahead. There's been a long-standing focus on improvements to the business environment, the kind of World Bank doing business kind of reforms, with a focus on increasing investment and ensuring high productivity and competitive export-oriented production. There's also a focus on startups, especially in the IT sector, where we've seen a lot of success. I think 40% of service exports, I think Anders mentioned, being in the IT sector. Research commercialization and industry science linkages, so the commercialization of research. There's also a focus on developing the national research infrastructure and developing a methodology to evaluate the quality of research institutes, which is obviously, a move towards more competitive funding, etc. And also to strengthen agricultural research and education and rural extension services. So there's obviously a range of activities which the government are already engaged with. We would look to support these areas as part of the review process. If I could get the next slide. Like I said, we have perhaps three topics. Some possible ideas would include smart specialization. This could include foresight, the public-private dialogue. Obviously, SMEs are important in that process. Looking at industry science linkages and also trying to capture the possible role of the free economic zones. We've already seen some success, so maybe that can even be strengthened. Research infrastructure development, that can obviously, it plays a very important role in commercialization and spin-offs, the quality of the research infrastructure, and included in that, would also obviously be the evaluation methodology for research institutes as an important part of that. And we also noted that there's a plan to initiate research programs specific to new technologies. So we see a lot of areas where we feel we could contribute. In terms of other areas, I think other areas seem relevant. The development of the Diaspora Network. We understood there's some plans already in health and medicine, or some initial steps. I think diaspora. We noted in many of the countries we work on, there's often a focus on investment. I think the diaspora have a very important role to play in investment in all countries that have a big diaspora. But sometimes it's harder to measure knowledge flows, so intangibles. So actually, it can be just as important in your research networks, for universities, but you don't measure these things necessarily. It's not in the national accounts. If you're collaborating with a scientist somewhere in Europe or the US or Canada, that might not necessarily be captured, but the value added is definitely there. So it's important to definitely look at that in the academic sector and the kind of higher value added sectors. Topic we're looking at with Georgia is public procurement as a driver of innovation, but this is at the that's still in process, but we can share the findings of that with the government, see if it's something that Moldova would be interested in. Some of the recommendations, agricultural research and education, rural extension services is another possible area, and we understood also there's been some recent work on open innovation, which we could probably include in the core part of the review, not necessarily for a separate chapter, but in innovation governance. So that's just a few of the areas. As I said, thank you very much to the RCO, and also for the conversations we had with Ministry of Education as well, just to help us to understand what the priorities are. Obviously, we haven't yet selected the focus topics, so we're very much open to hear from people in this room if they have any views today. We'll also be in contact with our focal point in Ministry of Education to kind of finalise the plans for the structure of the review. So, well, thank you very much, and we're happy to receive any comments or discussion. Thank you.
Just to clarify a little bit, we have there's a certain scope of this review process that we have to keep in mind. What we typically do is, for what Chris presented as parts 1 and 2, are things that we will do mostly in-house with the expertise that we have. And for part 3, we would then pick 3 relatively specific topics and try to get the right expertise for this. There will be some preparatory work and a research mission, but not an actual technical assistance project. So it's important to make sure that we find topics that are interesting to you, that are additive in some way, that complements what you're already planning to do or what you already want to do. For instance, smart specialization is an EU animal, and they have a lot of resources for this. So if we do something along those lines, we have to make sure that we find something that we can contribute that is additive what EU might or might not do. As far as I understand, it's the problem is more on the uptake side than the fund availability side on that. So we need to nail these topics down, and that's one of the objectives that we have also for this mission.
Yes, thank you. And also, thank you, Chris, for this presentation. Before we move on to the findings of the Innovation Policy Outlook, as far as Moldova is concerned, we have about 7 minutes that we can use for discussion of the new project, the National Innovation for Sustainable Development Review, and I would indeed suggest that we spend those 7 minutes on a discussion of what could be the 2 or 3 priority topics that we would focus on in depth in that review, again building on what we are already doing in the framework of the Innovation Policy Outlook. So if you have any suggestions along those lines, please feel free to share them, and please introduce yourselves briefly with your name and your affiliation.
Lucia Kasap, Operations Officer for Education at the World Bank, based here in the Moldova country office. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation of today's workshop. I think innovation is one of the key actions to be implemented in all sectors. And I was wondering by the presentation of the share that you did on the number of employees in each sector, what we look at is the fact that though in some sectors there are many people employed, their input in the GDP is quite small, and I think it's very interesting to look at this aspect. What is the actually correlation between these two important aspects? I think this would be would give something for the further analysis, and it's obvious that there is IT sector which actually is giving quite high productivity, but there like wine sector, though it is in the agriculture, is not contributing like ICT, and then maybe there are other sectors which can actually give you a very good correlation in this sense. And also, I think it's important to mention that integration of the innovation with the university, what we are actually looking at the moment and working pretty hard with the ministries. Hopefully by the end of the year we will have a project which would stimulate the higher education institution to actually do more research and actually do jointly with the research institution and with the SME. Moldova is a quite small country, and it's pretty important for all together to work on the same things, actually to give the outcome what we are looking for. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And if you have any documents perhaps that you could share on the work that you're currently doing or that you're planning, we would welcome that. Mm-hmm.
Hello, my name is Alena Onofrei. I'm head of Policy and Innovation Division from the Ministry of Education, Culture and Research. Thank you very much for the presentation. I think it's a good start for us to develop the policy in the domain of innovation. We have a few commitment, and one of them are the same that you mentioned. First of all, it's smart specialization. Smart specialization is a commitment of our government to develop, and it is included in the government plan of action. For December, we must have a smart specialization in the Republic of Moldova. I think we have a lot of hard work to do, and we hope that we will advise us to develop smart specialization in the Republic of Moldova. I think it's an innovation policy that we can just match with the European Union, and we just have this commitment. The second one, I think it's open science. Also, it's very important for us that you mentioned, because it also will help us to have a science and innovation more open and at the international level. And the relation with diaspora, I think it's very important for us, and we have some action to include diaspora in the processing and the development of innovation policy in the Republic of Moldova. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any, please? Mm-hmm. Do we have more?
Stimați colegi, bună ziua! Sunt Nicolae Taran, vicedirector al Institutului de Horticultură și Tehnologie Alimentare, care nu mă cunosc. Am o practică de a lucra și în cadrul public, am o practică de lucru de cercetare, am o practică de lucru și în afaceri. Și ar spune, într-adevăr, că noi astăzi suntem la o ședință care, în primul rând, iarăși ne arată necesitatea inovării, vorbim de inovare, vorbim de practici bune internaționale și noi stăm în sală, am o senzație că noi suntem în două lumi. Este o lume virtuală și este una reală. Lumea virtuală, să știi, care noi vorbim dumneavoastră. Sunt nevoi de politici, sunt nevoi de finanțări, sunt nevoi de inovare pe care se bazează societatea. Asta e foarte bine și noi asta auzim fiecare zi. La asta nu schimbă nimic. Dar realitatea care este azi la noi în Moldova, pare mi se este mai rea decât în 90, mai rea decât în 2008 și mai rea decât în ultima criză care a fost. Eu nu știu, asta poate că este o înțelegere a mea incorrectă, dar după cele programe de stat care au fost lansate de apeluri pentru cercetare și dezvoltare pentru perioada 20-23, practic toată știința și academică și ramurală s-a nimerit într-un impas. A fost un concurs nereușit, un concurs care bazat pe un amalgam de proiecte neclar stabilite de la început, niște condiții de participare la concursuri care s-au schimbat pe parcurs și ca rezultat avem ce avem astăzi. Astăzi nu avem programe de cercetare pe 4 ani, dar dacă avem tăiate cu 30%, nu avem proiecte naționale și nu știm de unde să fie finanțată infrastructura. Asta e real, noi suntem în luna ianuarie și nu avem. Și aici eu apela la Comisia Europeană pentru Europa de a face totuși, asta e poziția guvernării sau asta e poziția Comisiei ONU pentru Europa, economice. Sau noi vorbim că trebuie inovare pentru dezvoltare, de fapt noi tăiem finanțarea, dacă în anii, chiar și 10 ani în urmă, pentru cercetare și dezvoltare, care intra și componenta inovare, erau alocați de la bugetul de stat undeva 600 de milioane. Anul acesta noi avem pentru programele de stat, avem 207, da? Și pentru proiecte naționale 139. Practic avem 2 ori mai puțin. Noi vorbim că este nevoie de a crește rolul inovării, dar vorbind una și făcând alta, noi facem așa că cei care au mai rămas în Moldova o să plece și ei. După reforma și finanțarea proiectelor pentru perioada anilor 20-23, 4 ani, o să rămânem și mai departe fără cercetare. Un concurs care a arătat că în Moldova nu există o politică bun, ok. Eu vorbesc asta deoarece inovarea, finanțarea este o parte a inovării. Ok, eu îmi cer scuză, dar nu poate fi o inovare fără finanțare. Inovarea mai întâi cere niște investiții, investiții care se recuperează pe parcurs. neinvestind în cercetare, neinvestind în inovare, noi nu o să avem dezvoltare tehnologică. De aceea dați să revizuim poziția noastră. Vorbim de o inovare reală, practică, care are nevoie în Moldova, sau vorbim de pur și simplu un proiect care, teoretic, care nu o să aducă nimic pentru noi. Mersi și cer scuze dacă n-a fost în temă.
Thank you for those comments. And I think funding is always an issue in all the countries that we analyze and support. We have to probably realize that innovation is one priority, one issue that the government pursues, but in every country there are also other priorities, and innovation, including innovation funding, has to compete with other priorities. That's just a reality. And one of the perhaps key things that we can support the country with is make sure that whatever the government decides to invest in innovation is used as efficiently as possible and yields the maximum outcome and maximum benefit for the sustainable development of the country. And I think we have a lot of good practice to share in this regard. Even though we probably all agree that it would be nice to have more funding for innovation, but we have to be realistic in this regard as well. So thank you very much for all your comments. We've taken them on board. I think we will probably have to continue our discussions a little bit with the Ministry of Education to settle on the priority topics finally. Also, given that perhaps the development of strategic priorities within the government is still not complete. So we propose that we will continue this dialogue in the coming weeks with you. And with that, I would like to move to the second project that we're undertaking with Moldova, the subregional innovation policy outlook. This project, as has been explained, is more advanced, so we are in a position to share with you today preliminary findings from the self-assessment that the government has done and also from the parallel assessment that we have done on the basis of our own expertise. And the introduction to the project will be done by my colleague Jacob. Do you need mine?
Thank you, Ralph, and good morning to you all. And I would like to start by echoing what my colleague said earlier, and thank you all for being here, but also for your active contributions to this second project that we will talk about, the Innovation Policy Outlook. And of course, give a special thanks to our two partner institutions, the Ministry of Education, Culture and Research, and also the Institute of Economic Research, who have shown a lot of commitment and flexibility and support to this initiative over the last month. So for the remainder of this roundtable, we will talk about this second initiative, and I will try to highlight a little bit how this initiative is different. I can understand that you will have some questions about why we are presenting results of one initiative and launching a second one more or less at the same time. But as you will hopefully see throughout my presentations, there are quite some differences in the scope and the approach, and also in the objectives. So we will, if we go to the first slide, Tatiana, we will present the first findings of our research of the last 5-6 months, I would say. These are still, I would say, quite raw findings, preliminary findings. I would call them first insights rather than confirmed findings. And we would also like to then fill some information gaps. We are, as I said, still not at the end of our assessment, and we would like to leverage the presence of all of you, and we're really very amazed with how many relevant stakeholders are here today. Leverage that presence and ask you a few questions and get your insights into some of the issues that still remain to be clarified. And of course, I want to give you in this first presentation a bit of an overview of where we stand and what the timeline is of this project. So, a little bit of background. Some of you are already familiar with this project. Those that attended the first roundtable that we had here in September. But for those of you who have not, it's a new initiative, and I think that's the first difference with the review. It's a pilot initiative. It's the first time that this type of assessment is happening at this with this scope and this geographic focus. It's also funded by the government of Sweden. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Sweden for their generous support. And it's implemented by the same section, of course, the Innovative Policies Development section at UNECE. And essentially what we aim to do with this project is to assess the scope and quality of innovation policies, institutions and processes across 6 countries at the same time. So essentially Eastern Europe and South Caucasus, so Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova and Ukraine. And that's, I would say, the second important difference to the review. Rather than an in-depth look at one country, we have a benchmarking, let's say, dimension to the IPO, the Innovation Policy Outlook, that really defines this project. And just like with the review, this will also have as a final output a UNECE flagship publication, so a comprehensive report that provides the analysis and the recommendations. Not only across the 6 countries, but also at the sub-regional level. So we hope that let's say the impact and value of this project goes beyond this publication. We want to evaluate the progress in innovation policy and institutional reform. Also identify and monitor some of the policy priorities and support needs. As I said, there will be actionable policy recommendations that will come out of this analysis that will be included in the publication. And of course also encourage more effective policy dialogue in an area that is as transversal as innovation policy and foster interministerial and interagency coordination. We hope that today's discussion will be a first step in this direction. I think with innovation it's extremely important that the different ministries, the different agencies engage in regular and systematic coordination. And of course, we also hope that this exercise will facilitate medium and long-term planning and also potentially be a tool that the government can leverage to mobilize resources, including from donors. The scope of the IPO is structured around 3 pillars, and that's, I would say, another difference to the review. So for the Innovation Policy Outlook, we use the same exact assessment framework for each of the 6 countries. We don't, let's say, adjust and produce elective chapters based on specific topics. No, we've tried to really produce a framework that is relevant for the individual country contexts, but also applicable to the whole region, or sub-region as we call it at UNECE, at once. And my colleagues Dimitri and Stephanie will talk a little bit more about pillars 1 and 2, and then I will present at the end pillar 3. A few words about the timeline of the project. We are now more than halfway through the implementation of the Innovation Policy Outlook. We started at the beginning of 2019 when we developed the methodology and we engaged the countries and we developed a research questionnaire. We then piloted this methodology in Georgia. We thought that with a pilot project it was particularly important to make sure that the methodology is functional and applicable. We then adjusted the methodology and then started the assessment phase, where we went into each country, we launched the assessment, the project. We held a training with stakeholders so that the methodology was clear and applicable. And then we distributed this questionnaire with the help of our partners and started gathering the information. And in Moldova, we given the political situation before the summer, we only launched this project in September. So a little bit later than the other countries, and today is also the last consultation meeting within that group of countries. Once we have finalized completed today's meeting, we may still reach out to some of you for final requests of information, and then we will really engage in the final analysis and the drafting of the publication, and we will launch the publication at a high-level conference in Geneva in the autumn of this year, and then come back to Chisinau and the other capitals to launch and present the final findings here in each of the countries. Just a quick slide on how the assessment process functions, just to be very clear on that, and I think that's another difference to the review. We implemented in each of the countries what we call a government self-assessment. So this questionnaire that I mentioned was passed on to our partners who disseminated the questionnaire amongst relevant institutions and agencies, and I think many of you must have received it because the answers were very very comprehensive and varied. And in parallel, we conducted what we call an independent assessment with the help of a local expert and with the input mainly of non-governmental stakeholders. So we wanted to have this dual, let's say, assessment process, this complementary input from the government side and from non-governmental stakeholders. Then we engage in the consultation, and today is a big part of that analysis, and then finally the publication. A few words on the next steps in the assessment process here in Moldova. As I said, we may reach out to some of you in the next few weeks for some final input. We will be very eager to collect your details and business cards in the coffee break and after the meeting. We then have a sub-regional meeting planned where each government will take part, including the independent experts, to discuss findings not only at the national level but at the regional level, and this will take place in Geneva on the 3rd of March. And then we will draft the manuscript, engage in a comprehensive internal and external review, and again you will be involved in or given an opportunity to provide feedback and comments on our manuscript, on our draft manuscript. The publication will then be translated into Russian, prepared for launching, and then launched at a high-level event in Geneva. So that's a little bit of the background and the objectives and the scope of the Innovation Policy Outlook. And I now really look forward to our discussions on some of our preliminary findings. Thank you.
Yes, I think we can immediately move to our colleague Dimitri, who will present the preliminary findings of the first pillar of the IPO, and then I think after this presentation we will have a first round of discussions. Dimitri, please.
Good morning. My name is Dmitry Plekhanov. I'm a consultant to UNECE. I'd like to present the first building block of the IPO project, the Pillar 1, Innovation Governance. The first pillar assesses the overarching strategies, institutional and legislative frameworks. It examines whether innovation governance is sound and well structured, and provides insights on coordination of innovation policy making. Next slide, please. So it has two sub-pillars. The first sub-pillar relates to frameworks. So we look at agenda setting for science innovation policy. We look at other policy areas related to innovation, like education, sustainable development strategy, SME development strategy, and industrial strategy. We also look at institutions with responsibilities for science innovation in Moldova, and we also look at possible legislative gaps and regulatory component of science innovation system in Moldova. And the second sub-pillar is dedicated to coordination. So it includes international cooperation in science and technology, and also looks at policy coordination at the central government level, and also coordination between central, regional, and local governments. And on this slide you can see an example of the visual representation of the scoring. So we will use results of government self-assessment and results of independent assessment to provide scoring of science innovation policy, science innovation system in Moldova, to identify possible gaps and to identify strengths and opportunities for mutual learning for the countries in the IPO area. Next slide, please. And today I would like to present some very preliminary findings for this particular pillar on innovation governance. And it is also an invitation to a discussion. So if you want to complement those findings, if you disagree with some of them, please raise your hand and give us your feedback. So first of all, there is a need in Moldova to develop robust governance mechanism to increase effectiveness of science innovation policy initiatives and efficiency of government spending on R&D. Gross domestic expenditures on R&D as a share of GDP has been in the decline, and in absolute numbers, the public support of research innovation doesn't allow opportunity to create a globally competitive science and innovation system. More importantly, it's very challenging for our current research projects and innovation projects to remain operational and functional given the current level of government support. Political instability may lead to a lack of consistency in science and innovation policy making. It makes the environment quite turbulent, and therefore there may be some frequent changes in science innovation system that will lead to overall low efficiency of how government spending is distributed and lead to efficient initiatives in Moldova. Research and higher education are weakly linked with each other. There are possible synergetic effects between research and education, and currently Moldova doesn't explore, doesn't link those two areas. And there is also limited cooperation between industry and academia. And to develop development of these linkages between industry and academia can possibly lead to greater innovation output, and also will increase the quality of research and education in the country. There is also a need to improve the working conditions and career perspectives in Moldovan research to attract more young people to join research as their main career option. There are also some gaps in legal frameworks related to easiness of opening a new business. There are also missing legislation on insolvency procedures and bankruptcy. And also there is a need to enable creation of spin-offs, so we need to develop more robust legislation in that area. There is also a need to increase direct and indirect support for the business R&D in Moldova. Currently, the support of government can be improved to enable a higher growth of innovative businesses in the country. And also there is a need to concentrate science innovation policy initiatives not only on high technology sectors, but also to take into account possibilities and opportunities for the development of industrial sectors that are seen traditionally as low-tech or low in R&D intensity. One of the possible avenues for the development of science innovation policy in Moldova would be a focus also on creative industries and trying to identify the potential of creative industries and low-tech industries for the country development. And at this point, I would like to ask you several questions related to frameworks. So the first question would be about academia-industry collaboration. Could you please elaborate on current policy initiatives aimed at fostering academia-industry collaboration, and also to identify certain challenges that prevent a more effective and more efficient research commercialization in Moldova? So if you have any comments or questions, please raise your hand. So once again, the first question is on academia-industry collaboration. Are there any initiatives in Moldova to support a greater cooperation between private businesses and public research organizations? So you can take a bit of time to think about this question if you're a bit hesitant about providing any answers to it. Other questions also relate to access to finance for innovative businesses. So are there any policy initiatives that support a great access to finance innovative businesses in Moldova?
Hello to everyone. My name is Oksana Paladichuk. I come from the Organization for SME Sector Development. I'd like to come with a few comments to both of the questions. If referring to the connection between academia and industry, we should mention here the dual innovation and the initiatives of JZ and the professional schools, where they already try to directly connect the training courses and what the students are learning directly with the industries. We're still having in our universities the practical parts, which of course should be reinforced and relaunched for some of the universities. At the same time, here is where I should mention the clustering initiatives which ODIM is working on, and we're working on the four-leaf initiatives. That means that a cluster in our, from our point of view, should include a research institution or university, of course SMEs, public institutions, and business support organizations. So we've already launched two clusters of these types. Of course, this is only at the emergency level now, but we are planning to launch together with the colleagues, of course, the Ministry of Economy and Infrastructure, a new support instrument to further develop this communication. If referring to the innovation in the SME sector development, then an important thing to mention is that the SME law from 2016 already include this innovation as a priority in developing SME sector. Also, innovation, as you've mentioned before in previous presentations, innovation is a part of the SME development strategy and is a part of the action plans of the Ministry of Economy and Infrastructure. Of course, the business support programs ODIM is implementing now, the national programs, are planning to support innovative companies. Of course, we still have discussions of what is innovation and what is not innovation in our businesses, and we're likely more looking at local innovation than speaking about international innovation, meaning we're likely to support businesses that innovate at a local or regional level. It doesn't mean necessarily that this is an innovation on an international level. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Olga Duhliker, Ministry of Education, Culture and Research, sorry. So one policy initiative which derives from the national roadmap for the integration of the Republic of Moldova into the European research area for 2019-2021 is that the ministry has the possibility, wants to consider the possibility of introducing the industrial doctorate, so a way of transferring knowledge to the business environment. So this is one possibility to make research public bodies and businesses closer. Also, we have the intention to create a working group discussing the possibility to develop doctoral schools. So there is also, we have to rethink the educational system connected to PhD students. Also another way of involving businesses and public research institutions is the events that we organize concerning smart specialization strategies. So the entrepreneurial discovery process. Here the four stakeholders are involved: governance, business, civil society, and research. We would like to hear more possibilities and solutions, so in order to apply them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. More comments, replies to Dimitri's questions?
Also, I invite you to answer another question. So, which legislation gaps constrain the development of the national science and innovation system? Do you observe any inefficiencies in the current legislation that prevents the development of national science innovation system in Moldova?
If there are no more questions, perhaps we can still leave the possibility of providing additional comments in writing as well to our team. The question then would be, should we have a coffee break now before we move to Pillar 2? Yeah.
There is also Pillar 2.
Sorry? Oh, sorry. Okay. Then let's go to.
So then continue with Pillar 2 for this part, and then if you have any comments, you can provide them later. So the Pillar 2 relates to the question of coordination, and Moldova has already explored possibilities of establishing an interministerial council for the coordination of external policy initiatives and creation of coordinating mechanisms for science innovation policy across ministries. Then subnational authorities have impacts on science innovation policy, but the facts of regional governments and municipal governments on national science innovation system are not that clarified yet. Currently, there are no regional innovation strategies, and there are no subnational government bodies responsible for formulation or implementation of regional science and innovation policy initiatives. And there is also a sort of disbalance in national science innovation system. So the majority of all research innovation activities, they're centered in the capital, and regions don't play a major role in steering research and innovation activities in the country. Coordination and complementarities between national innovation policy and other policy areas like industrial policy or education are not well developed yet, and there are no clear mechanisms to strengthen coordination between various policy areas on the topic of science and innovation. Also have a number of questions for this sub-pillar. Next slide, please. The first question relates to raising the roles of regions in science innovation policy initiatives. So are there any plans to increase the role of regions in the future? Could you please provide any examples of best regional practices in science innovation? Maybe some regions are leading in particular industries, or they have a strong research foundation in certain research fields. So if you have any related information on these questions, please feel free to share with us, either now or later after the meeting. Please don't be shy.
I see some animated discussions among participants. Maybe some of you would like to share them with the entire audience? No?
Hello, my name is Ala. I represent Innovation Incubator in the South region in the Republic of Moldova. It's Gagauzia Autonomy region. We have Innovation Incubator. It's a network of innovation incubators in framework of National Agency of Research and Development. Thank you. Yes, we have some study, we have some examples of collaboration with SMEs in the region, and I can send this information for you if you need it. Okay.
Maybe can you please send this information in the form of PPTs or any policy documents in English or Russian if you have any, or like your language is also good. Thank you.
No more additional comments, questions, remarks? Okay, then as I said before, the door is still open to provide comments also in writing after this meeting. Is that it? Yeah, okay, so then let's go for a 15-minute coffee break and we reconvene at 11, let's say 15. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the presentation of the preliminary findings of the second pillar of the Innovation Policy Outlook. And this presentation will be made by our colleague Stefanie Stefanova. Please.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Ralph, for passing the floor. My name is Stefanie Stefanova, and I will present...
I think you have to switch on the microphone.
Yeah? Is that better? Perfect. Yeah, as I said, I will present our preliminary findings with regard to the second pillar of the Innovation Policy Outlook, which analyzes the specific measures, the policy tools that are put in place to support demand and supply for innovation in the economy. So before we go into our preliminary findings, I will just give you a brief overview of the pillar itself and its structure. So if we can go to the next slide. The pillar has three main objectives, namely those are to first take stock of the existing support measures that stimulate innovation in the economy, then to not only take into account its scale and scope, but also to consider the quality and implementation in terms of monitoring activities and impact assessment that would determine whether the specific measure in fact drives innovation. And finally, the objective 3 is to compare first compare the economy's performance across a number of indicators and then to build this comprehensive assessment of the innovation policy mix in Moldova. So if we could go to the next slide, we can see the structure of the pillar. It involves 5 dimensions or sub-pillars that capture both the technological and non-technological aspect of innovation. As you can see, there are many indicators involved. They range from practices and schemes to enhance the absorption capacities of economic entities. It goes through the different elements of innovation infrastructure, the relationships and synergies that exist in the economy, the linkages between industry and science, between businesses, within sectors, etc. Then, of course, it involves consideration of the schemes that analyze the actual diffusion of knowledge within the economy, and finally, the measures put in place to enhance research and education, enforcing and strengthening innovation mindset of the society in the overall human capital development. Now, On the right-hand side, you can see a graphical representation of the IPO scoring methodology for this pillar. It's a simple concept. Each of the sub-pillars is first assessed based on the economy's performance with respect to these indicators, and then compared in order to identify those areas of comparative advantage and the areas that need improvement in the economy. So in order to fill in our information gaps, we will need your help, and we have drafted a list of questions that we will raise with you after each sub-pillar. But please feel free to interrupt me at any point and ask questions or just give your comments. So let me begin with the first sub-pillar of knowledge absorption. It, to a large degree, considers the non-technological aspect of innovation and the schemes that enhance the absorptive capacity of economic entities. So our overall initial evaluation shows that there are several policy measures that support this dimension, with further efforts needed towards synchronization of the existing schemes and policy framework development. In particular, organizational and managerial practices in Moldova are mainly enhanced by management training programs. In the private sector, for instance, the SME development organization, ODIM, is quite active with efficient business management program in place. And also other entities such as the Chamber of Commerce and Industry organizes cross-border management programs. In the public sector, on the other hand, we have the Academy of Public Administration, which conducts a training program for civil servants at a 5-year period, and we would like to know more about the current implementation stage of this program. And we'll be happy to hear more about that at the time of discussion. Now, when it comes to the development of technical and business services, this area in Moldova is predominantly donor-driven, with active projects being implemented by the World Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and the US International Development Agency. But also it is indirectly supported by the state program for innovation and technology transfer. Now, the fiscal incentives for innovation are limited in Moldova. Preferential tax and customs facilities for S&T parks, park residents were envisioned by the former law on S&T parks, but to our knowledge they were never implemented and subsequently cancelled in the most recently adopted version of the law. Now, on the other hand, we have identified a good practice in the country, Moldova IT Park, which applies an extraterritorial approach, allowing its residents to make use of the whole city infrastructure while granting 7% single tax. Now, the demand for this measure has been increasing ever since its establishment, and currently there are over 500 active residents, many of who are newly established companies. However, the fiscal incentives for innovation in sectors other than IT are largely unavailable, and we would like to hear your opinion on that issue in a minute. The last point I'd like to mention here is that in the evaluation of this indicator, we will take into consideration the relief of fees on the acquisition of intellectual property rights that also is quite important. So if we can go to the next slide, we can see some questions that we have drafted for you. As we have 5 sections to cover, we won't be able to ask all of our questions, but this presentation will be distributed to all of you who are present today, and we hope that you will take time to get back to us with answers in the following days. So now we will stick to perhaps one question per sub-pillar. And that is namely, are there any envisioned amendments of the tax legislation to stimulate research and innovation activities in line with the Code on Science and Innovation, which stipulates favorable tax policy for innovation and technology transfer? So here we also welcome any comments with regard to the necessity of further fiscal stimulation for innovation in the country. perhaps that question is most relevant to the Ministry of Finance, but if there are no representatives, we welcome any of you to just give us your comments on the matter.
No comments.
Okay. Perhaps then another question. Yes, perhaps we'll contact them at another time. Perhaps another question to discuss would be, are there any plans to introduce schemes that support and accelerate R&D in state-owned enterprises? So let me just repeat one more time the questions for discussion under this sub-pillar. So the first one is, are there any envisioned amendments of the tax legislation to stimulate research and innovation activities in line with the Code on Science and Innovation? And the second question is, are there plans to introduce schemes that support and accelerate research and development in state-owned enterprises? Our screen is quite small.
It seems that there are some animated discussions around the table. Would anyone like to share those with the audience at large?
My name is Liliana Viero. I'm from the Intellectual Property Agency, so nothing to do with the incentives and the facilities for companies. But I suppose the Ministry of Finance or Ministry of Economy could answer to these questions. That is the reason for it is important for you to provide us with all the questions, and maybe each of us as public institution could contribute, because we see these questions and the results of the studies just today, so it's important to look through, to analyze, and to come with some more information.
Okay. Yes, as Stephanie said, we are certainly available also for written comments, and all the presentations on all three pillars will be shared with the Ministry of Education with an invitation to further distribute them to all stakeholders present here in the room and also to the wider stakeholder community.
Okay, in this case, please take time to think about those questions, and also in the next following days, we will have plenty of chance to communicate on these issues. Let me then continue to the second sub-pillar of innovation promotion. And again, if you have any comments, just please feel free to give them. So this second sub-pillar analyzes schemes and investments made mainly by the government for the establishment of knowledge-sharing platforms for product development. So our evaluation initially shows that innovative SMEs are supported by a number of events in Moldova and innovation incubators. We have representatives of IT for Business Applications incubator today from the Academy of Sciences, which also has the first blockchain laboratory in Moldova. So these elements they do not only provide solutions to students and researchers to commercialize their studies, but also create a knowledge-sharing environment that assists entrepreneurs in realizing their innovative business ideas. In addition, the conduct of business plan and startup competitions is enhanced by evident state support apart from the existing private and donor-driven initiatives in the area. We have three examples of different business plan competitions where state bodies are implementing partners For instance, the Business Innovative Idea competition is one prominent example, whose last edition was in 2017, and it was previously administered by the Agency for Innovation and Technology Transfer, later merged into the National Agency for Research and Development. So here would be a good moment to raise the issue of the responsibilities that were transferred to the National Agency for Research and Development, and we would like to receive some more information on that from you in a minute. Now, the other side of this dimension relates to R&D loans and VAT exemptions, which partially create access to finance and stimulate production of innovative goods. These elements are largely unavailable in Moldova. There are some alternative instruments in the form of guarantees and equity-type funding distributed by commercial banks, such as the Inofin instrument of the EU Horizon 2020 program. And then within the sources of information, we have also a few discrepancies, and they relate to the development of policy and institutional framework, addressing almost all of the elements under this sub-pillar, including business plan competitions, innovative incubators, and VAT exemptions. So we need more information on where you stand with the policy framework addressing these elements. So if we could go to the questions. First, we are interested in finding out what are the responsibilities taken over by the National Academy for Research and Development that were previously under the umbrella of the Agency for Innovation and Technology Transfer. So if we could just go back to the previous slide, please. Yeah. So the question is the following: are initiatives previously run by the Agency for Innovation and Technology Transfer, such as the Best Innovative Idea competition, to be continued by the National Agency for Research and Development?
Bună ziua, mă numesc Vadim Iaschevici, Agenția Națională pentru Cercetare și Dezvoltare, șef direcției proiecte inovaționale. Referitor la întrebarea respectivă, deci noi încă nu cunoaștem subiectul dacă o să prelungim pe viitor concursul respectiv, fiindcă sunt anumite chestiuni care trebuie de rezolvat. Prima întrebare este remunerarea participanților și aici apar dificultăți cu premiile care se acordă. Deci, trebuia să de rezolvat, pe urmă trebuie de rezolvat proveniența surselor financiare, dacă acestea vor fi planificate în bugetul de stat sau să trebuiască să căutăm investitori. Da? A doua întrebare, deci pe parcurs cred că acestea o să fie întrebări rezolvate și o să fie mai clar dacă organizăm sau nu pe viitor. Mulțumesc. Da? Proiectele, da. Păi aici se zice că toate, cum să zic, responsabilitățile au fost preluate, doar că concursul acesta, cea mai bună idee inovațională, încă nu se știe dacă o să fie preluat, dacă o să fie el organizat pe viitor. Anul acesta s-a organizat un concurs la Comrat, a fost un concurs a ideilor inovative de afaceri, a avut loc, deci, dar au fost la nivel regional, la nivel național, vă zic, o să fie clar pe parcurs.
Okay, thank you very much for this input. We will contact you in the following days for some more comments, if there are any more opinion. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. So we could perhaps move on to the next sub-pillar of relationships and linkages. This is a subpillar crucial for innovative development on both inter and inter-sectoral level. It analyzes schemes that support the creation of links across communities, between science and industry, and between and within sectors. So our overall initial evaluation shows that policy measures in this dimension are comprehensive and cover all areas, but certain fields lack important elements, relying on a fragmented policy framework. In particular, we have business networks supported by associations and chambers of commerce and industry. In addition, a clusterization strategy is currently being developed. However, acceleration and supplier matching services are not readily available, with entrepreneurs often lacking information, connections, and awareness of the services that are available to them, while startups are often pushed abroad in search for foreign acceleration services. Now, in addition to that, industry science linkages remained nascent, lacking industry research networks, innovation voucher schemes that are tools quite important for an emerging innovation ecosystem such as we have in Moldova. Now, in the niche of cooperative R&D grants, a relative support measure that is being implemented is the state program on innovation and technology transfer, which has the very important purpose of stimulating the cooperation between Moldovan businesses and R&D institutions. Now, we received some information that since 2005, 315 projects have been funded. Perhaps that refers to the total amount of projects funded in cooperative with cooperative funding, but in any case, it's a measure that has a lot of potential. And now the present challenges that it faces are the moderate interest for the innovation component and the difficulties related to finding a suitable partner to co-fund projects. When it comes to innovation infrastructure elements, there are few such in Moldova. We have one science and technology park, Academica, within a state-owned enterprise, Asotec. 4 operational innovation incubators, perhaps there are more, we'll need to follow up with you on this, and as well as technology transfer centers established at universities. Now, the next stage of development for these elements of infrastructure would be orientation towards services such as marketing and engineering, which would add value in face of rising competition from private innovation spaces, for example, that also provide co-working space. And then another 2 important points I would like to make under this dimension, if we go on the next slide, would be related to leveraging diaspora networks, an issue that we already touched base on. This indicator is particularly important for Moldova as a country with a large diaspora relative to its national population. And although currently there is no diaspora mobilization strategy in place, there are a few support measures that contribute to this dimension. For example, the governmental thematic grant program, Diaspora Engagement Hub, which includes a funding line specifically for innovative diaspora projects. We would like to know more about the outputs of this program. If anyone can provide more information, that will be very useful to us. And then to complete this dimension, with the rising proportion of female tertiary degree graduates, professionals and technicians, it is imperative to ensure better use of female skills in order to maximize the potential of the labor force and to achieve a well-functioning innovation policy. And while there is still a lot to be done in this area, there are quite evident policy efforts in recent years. With with a number of acts adopted, strategy on national level against domestic violence, as well as a number of projects implemented by national agencies, the NGOs, and different private and international organizations. Two of the prominent examples in this area are Women in Business, administered by the SME Development Organization, and Women in Politics, implemented by UN Women jointly with UNDP. So, if we could move on to the questions, we would like to ask, has a consensus been reached regarding the conduct of an impact analysis on entrepreneurial activity in order to approve the regulations to the law on S&T parks and innovative incubators? This question refers to the law on S&T parks, where we received information that the regulations have not yet been adopted. So if you can just give us any information on that, and also your opinion on the role and the potential for innovation within the niche of S&T parks in Moldova.
Da, bună ziua! Olga Tretiakov, Direcția Politici în domeniul cercetării și inovării, Ministerul Educatiei, Culturii și Cercetării. Cu adevărat, legea cu privire la parcurile științifico-tehnologice și a incubatoarelor de afaceri a intrat în vigoare și urmau să fie elaborate regulamente care să facă legea aplicabilă. Agenția Națională pentru Cercetare și Dezvoltare a elaborat proiectele pe 3 regulamente. Este vorba de selectarea administratorilor parcurilor științifico-tehnologice și a incubatoarelor de afaceri, selectarea rezidenților și a proiectelor pentru finanțare și modul de evaluare a proiectelor în cadrul parcurilor științifico-tehnologice și a incubatorilor de afaceri. Ministerul a încercat să le promoveze, să fie adoptate prin hotărâre de guvern. Ne-am pomenit că este necesară analiza impactului de reglementare pentru că afectează relațiile aferente activității de întreprinzător. Avem analiza de impact, avem avizul pozitiv și urmează în cel mai apropiat timp să întreprindem pașii necesari pentru a promova aceste regulamente să fie adoptate prin hotărâri de guvern și să facă legea funcționabilă.
Thank you very much for this input, Olga, and we are happy to hear that there have been positive developments with respect to the adoption of this law and its regulations. Now, would there be any comments on the role of S&T parks in Moldova? We heard that there is an ongoing debate on whether more stimulation should be granted to S&T parks and their development. Okay, perhaps we'll follow up on this in the following days. Another question: if there are any representatives of gender active organizations, what are currently the focus areas of policy intervention in the field of gender equality in Moldova? Let me just repeat the question. What are currently the focus areas of policy intervention in the field of gender equality in Moldova?
For instance, if we will refer to the SME strategy, then we should mention that 2 years after the strategy was adopted, there were introduced 2 new priorities, one of which is women entrepreneurship. So women entrepreneurship is one of the priorities in developing enterprises. That's why we are currently implementing a national program on women economic empowerment, and we're trying to encourage women opening a business and managing it. Also, there are some incentives and some policies of women representation in politics as well, I know, but it's not my area of intervention, so I'm not going to give too many details here. But on SME development, we have this gender issues in our strategic activities and in the action plans of the Ministry of Economy and Infrastructure. There are also objectives on women economic development.
Thank you for this input. Perhaps we'll have time for a few more questions. Which are the latest developments with regard to Diaspora Network support initiatives in the country?
Violina Donu, Biroul Relații cu V-ați referit inițial la programul Diaspora Engagement Hub. Noi implementăm cu succes acest program. A fost lansat în 2016 și de la lansarea acestuia până în prezent au fost finanțate circa 90 de granturi. Cadrul Diaspora Engagement Hub sunt mai multe subprograme. Unul dintre acestea este proiectul inovativ ale diasporei. Noi avem chiar acum lansat apelul pentru diasporă, valabil până pe 20 februarie, privind aplicarea la subprogramul proiectul inovativ ale diasporei. Am lansat un astfel de apel și anul trecut. Au fost proiecte, au fost 4 proiecte câștigătoare. Anul acesta deschidem apelul iarăși pentru 4 beneficiari care vor fi selectați. De asemenea, în cadrul Diaspora Engagement Hub avem și subprogramul abilitarea femeilor din diaspora. Este un subprogram destinat femeilor din diaspora care doresc să inițieze afaceri în Republica Moldova. Alte programe pentru diaspora pe care le implementăm sunt organizarea zilelor diasporei la nivel central, la nivel local. Organizăm forumuri investiționale peste hotare pentru diasporă și, desigur, oferim suport asociațiilor din diasporă privind implicarea lor cu proiecte de promovare a Republicii Moldova. Deci oferim suport nu la nivel financiar, dar la nivel de asigurarea a puncții de legătură a asociațiilor cu instituțiile din Republica Moldova și consultanță. Cam asta este la moment. Dacă mai sunt careva întrebări referitor la domeniul diaspora, aș putea să răspund.
Thank you very much. We could perhaps get in touch over the following days and get some more information on the current projects that are being done and the specific measures. We can see that with relation to diaspora in recent years, policy efforts have been enhanced and there are quite a few new measures in place that have met with a large amount of interest. So we'll be interested to include that in our project. Now, I believe in interest of time, I will need to just cover the last 2 sub-pillars. So the 4th sub-pillar of knowledge diffusion looks at the mechanisms that ensure the equal and widespread access to information within the society, and it is closely linked to digital transformation of businesses and processes in the country. Now, among the recent developments in this area is the National Broadband Development Program for 2018-2020 and its respective action plan. Now, while we do not have full information with regard to the current implementation stage of this program, we have received information that its delivered outputs to date include increased access to advanced electronic services and reduced rural-urban divide, which are both quite relevant for the current present challenges in Moldova. In addition to that, an e-government center provides an open data platform with access to public data sets, ensuring transparency of the activities of state bodies. Again, quite important for the well-functioning flow of innovation policy. Now, competitive funding is provided under the World Bank Competitiveness Enhancement Project, and that contributes significantly to the development of this dimension. And industrial technology assistance is provided to SMEs, which has spillover effects of improving the business enabling environment in the country. Now, the missing elements within this area include information and brokerage schemes that would support the planning and implementing of innovation activities. This is quite important for SMEs that are in the beginning of applying a certain product they have developed or an innovative business idea. Now, we have an information gap here with regards to the policy framework outlining schemes that facilitate public procurement for innovations. So we'd be happy to receive information on that if anyone would like to include comments. Now, our questions under this dimension include the broadband development program, its implementation stage, as well as your opinion on the current use and potential for the digital transformation of the country, and the equal and widespread access of information. So let me just repeat the question. What is the current implementation stage of the broadband development program? Perhaps the representatives of the Ministry of Economy who are not present today would be able to answer and give us more information on that. Now, there are also issues related to the public procurement for innovation. If any comments on these issues arise in the following days, please let us know. Now, I would like to just cover the last sub-pillar that relates to research and education, and perhaps then we'll see if we have time to answer some more questions. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so the last sub-pillar relates to the schemes that enhance research and education, especially STEM-related fields, that is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The Moldovan National R&D Program 2020-2023 includes the main action plan for research funding in the country. We have already discussed a bit whether that would be continued and implemented as given, but as it is as of this moment valid, we can see that the expenditure on R&D in 2018 has increased by almost 8% since 2017. However, it decreases as a percent of GDP, which calls for us to understand the underlying factors. Now, there are several calls for research proposals that were made available to enhance research. We have a state program for innovation and technology transfer, as well as a competition of grants for the development of innovative infrastructure. And it is here important to mention that it's essential to facilitate the procedural framework. For example, funding obtained from the National Agency for Research and Development is currently conditional on applicants' residential status in science and technology parks, which could complicate the procedure of obtaining funds. Now, when it comes to STEM education, a concept on STEM education was developed by the Ministry of Education, Culture and Research in 2016. And in the general education subsector, STEM education is mainly enhanced and supported by competitions. There is an annual national competition on science and engineering that is continuously being implemented.
Could you put the microphone more closer?
I'm sorry, we don't have a good. Yeah, I'll just try to speak a bit louder, and hopefully everybody can participate and hear me. So our information gap under this dimension relates to the framework that addresses the policies that increase to increase the number of STEM students. While we have a few measures in place to enhance STEM education, it is not clear whether these specific elements are defined by a certain policy framework. So we would also like to hear a bit more on that from you. And finally, I would like to emphasize again on the one of the biggest present challenges that we already discussed, and that's the structural problem of continuous reduction in student cohorts. In Moldova, there has been a nearly 36% negative growth in enrollment for the last 5-year period, which poses the enormous threat of depletion of intellectual assets. So policy efforts must be increasingly oriented towards attracting students and maximizing the large potential for human capital development in the country. Okay, so the last set of questions refer to research and education. And the first one is, has the structural problem of continuing enrollment decline been addressed? And what measures are in place to attract students to Moldovan higher education institutions? We've already discussed this a bit, but if there are any comments?
Does it work? With no intent actually to take the role of the Ministry of Education, who definitely would give you much more information. I can say exactly what we are doing to support two of these aspects. First of all, under the current project, we do support schools to access 160 schools to equip with the new laboratories for STEAM. Exactly to address the issue with not only decreasing the number of students, but actually decreasing the number of students in STEM who goes in Lyceum to the real stream, which we are calling. So that is the efforts in the general education. And for the new upcoming project in higher education, there is a greater role to enhance 4 areas. That one would be for the engineering, the second one would be for IT, the third one is pedagogy, because actually here is a major gap of teachers actually who are teaching the STEM subjects, and the fourth one is medicine. And in these 4 areas would be targeted intervention to help the universities, which would be selected according to some criteria, to get access to equipment, to get access to for the students to get access to this subjects. So hopefully this would help the system to address exactly this STEAM issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We were not aware of these projects, so it's very useful to fill in our gaps on this issue. Perhaps the Ministry of Education would like to add to this, if there are any developments on STEM apart from the national competition that has been conducted.
Well, I'm sorry, higher education division is not present, and this is their subject. We shall provide you with information as soon as possible to this
That's great, no problem. And thank you for specifying. We will contact the Higher Education Division and get the information. Now, I believe that we can conclude this.
Thank you. First, can we clarify what is continuing enrollment decline? Is it different than decline in general demographic decline, or is it a decline separate from the rest of the changes in demographic profile of the country? And why do you think that we need measures to attract to higher education, to attract students to higher education? Some 5 years ago, we had more available places than we have students exiting the high schools. And what we have actually is the extremely high number of high educated people, officially by diplomas, and the companies are complaining about the quality of the labor force, and then usually in labor positions are employed people with high education, which is not by the level is not corresponding to the level of job. So this is the first. Let's discuss about the nature of the question.
Thank you. I'm happy to clarify. So first, for the statistic that we have received information on, this is 35.8% negative growth in enrollment rate. So that is simply the decline as equivalent for demographic decline. And actually, one of the underlying challenges of out-migration, the high out-migration that we can observe in Moldova is indeed the out-migration of students and high-skilled personnel, and there have been quite a few opinions with regard to this issue, and we are happy to hear some other opinion on the matter if you think that is not a current challenge. Certainly, measures to attract students are always positive in terms of human capital development. Now, whether these measures should entail increased funding is another matter, and how much this funding would be is also a different issue. Just the necessity of these measures is something that we need to discuss.
Yes, that's right. We need to discuss the sources of the issues and the policy solutions to them, but before the one part of the discussion is the observing, yes, the quality of the questions and the quality of the statistics you are using, and like an appropriate understanding of the dynamics we see by numbers, because what numbers are reflecting some real situations which we need to understand deeper before trying to find solutions, because if we will find the solutions which are coming only from numbers, we will probably arrive to the wrong point. And I'm very happy that someone already mentioned that the quality of the STEM education on all levels is very weak, and the availability of the professors and teachers in STEM education is far from the modern needs. And in official curriculum there is not such a term as STEM. It's a modern something which is not taken up by the official management of the education system. And yes, one of the solutions might be that we don't need in each and every school the separate teacher for mathematics, physics, informatics, chemistry or whatever. Probably we need to look into the curriculum and revise it and adapt it to the capacity available of teachers and try to help them to teach integrated subject, as well as from another part of the curriculum we have everything which is related to history, geography, art, and blah blah blah, which is not taught integrally, and people are disconnected from most of their modern understanding of the things.
Dacă îmi permiteți, if I can, yeah, thank you. Ministerul Educației, Culturii și Cercetării, deși nu sunt colegii mei, cred că nu este cazul să abordăm, dar dacă să abordăm, atunci trebuie să abordăm problema calitativ a învățământului superior. Noi știm foarte bine că la moment sunt 14 universități, numărul de studenți a cărora este în declin. Aceasta este o realitate pe care a constatat-o și Ministerul Educației, Culturii și Cercetării. Probabil Lucia, ca să putea să-mi dea voie să amăgie sau să spun minciuni, suntem într-un proces de reformare a învățământului superior. De aceea nu am vrut să dăm noi detalii, ci detaliile o să fie expediate, respectiv cu învățământul superior și reforma. Sigur că ne dorim să reformăm sistemul, dar această reformă trebuie să fie una nu atât de radicală, ca să nu se întâmple acele critici. Societatea civilă, mediul academic, ministerele de resort o să fie implicate în procesul de discuție a conceptului de reformare a învățământului superior. Este clar că nu poate să existe tot atât de mare număr de universități care a existat cu un număr dublu precum era, să zic eu, cu 10 ani în urmă. Respectiv, procesul este inițiat deja în cadrul Ministerului, conceptul o să fie înaintat și există și o finanțare externă, mai degrabă un împrumut pe care noi să-l luăm pentru reformarea învățământului superior. De aceea ne lăsăm acea rezervă de concept pe care o să o propunem spre discuție publică și acele păreri ale dumneavoastră o să fie foarte importante în procesul de reformare a învățământului superior. Un concept pe care eu pot să-l asigur sau să-l asigur este de fapt internaționalizarea și la moment fiecare dintre universitățile din Republica Moldova au pregătit un astfel de concept de internaționalizare a studiilor care lucrează foarte bine în alte țări. Asta ne dorim și noi, pe lângă studenții pe care îi avem, să atragem studenți străini. Universitatea de Medicină probabil este în topul preferințelor și au o experiență foarte bună de atrage a studenților străini. Ne dorim ca și celelalte universități să preia aceste bune practici și să le implementeze ulterior. De aceea, una dintre metodele de creștere a numărului studenților este atragerea studenților străini. Pentru aceasta, cum au menționat și colegii, noi trebuie să ridicăm nivelul de studii, ceea ce se face, se lucrează la curriculum foarte mult, se lucrează de comun cu Ministerul Educației, Culturii și Cercetării pentru a aduce acele competențe profesionale la un nivel înalt, fiindcă un student pe piața muncii trebuie să posede competențe profesionale înalte ca să fie solicitat. În acest moment fac o sugestie și angajatorilor ca să conlucreze de fapt cu universitățile în ridicarea calității profesionale a studenților, fiindcă structurile respective deja au fost introduse în cadrul universităților și fiecare consiliu a universității, a fiecărei facultăți de fapt are un consiliu de consultanță cu angajatorii. De aceea, mână la mână, dacă reușim să ridicăm nivelul studiilor la noi, să ridicăm nivelul de internaționalizare, fiindcă noi nu putem să nu dăm voie studenților noastre să acceseze alte universități din străinătate. Este o prostie și o minciună și o nonsens. Noi avem nevoie de oameni calificați în Republica Moldova și dacă studenții aleg să meargă în altă parte, înseamnă că trebuie să lucrăm foarte bine aici ca studenții să nu plece. Mulțumesc!
Thank you for all this input. It's been very useful, and I would like to just confirm that all of our statistics come from our compilation of a governmental self-assessment and an independent expert assessment, and we can verify those statistics. And of course, the second thing I would like to emphasize is that you're absolutely right. The purpose of all pillars are qualitative evaluation over quantitative, but rather statistics are useful to raise questions and to understand the underlying factors of the qualitative evaluation based on that. Sorry, we don't have perfect coverage of the microphone system, but I would like to thank you all for the inputs on this pillar, and to invite my colleague to present the third pillar of the innovation policy outlook.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You can hear me all, I hope. Yes. Okay, so thank you for your patience. This is the last pillar of the innovation policy outlook assessment that we will look at. And this pillar we call the policy, innovation policy processes. It's essentially as much about innovation policy as it is also about public administration reform and governance issues. Because what we do is we look at the underlying policy process. We can go to the first slide, Tatiana. The underlying policy processes that shape policy reform. So we look at things like the quality of the policy making, its inclusiveness, transparency and accountability, whether relevant stakeholders are included and consulted, if ministries coordinate with each other on policy drafts, etc., etc. So quite a broad topic. We approach this pillar a little bit differently, which I will mention in a minute. If we go to the next slide, you can see the four what we call sub-pillars that we cover. And what we really try to achieve here is to follow the policy-making path from its outset. So we look at preparation issues of policy documents, of laws, of specific measures. We look at design issues, but then we also look as much as possible, depending on how advanced the implementation is. We look at implementation issues and also at post-implementation. So to what extent lessons from the implementation have been adopted in other new policies, to what extent there's an evaluation, impact assessment in place. Now, if we go to the next slide, this policy measure differentiates itself a little bit from the other two pillars because it's purely qualitative. We don't attempt to score countries on this specific pillar. The reason is that it focuses on one specific policy measure that is hopefully representative of other policy making in other fields. So, for example, in Georgia, we selected a matching grant scheme, in Ukraine, an its national innovation strategy. And here in Moldova, the government, in consultation with us, decided to focus on the 2016 law on SMEs, which essentially establishes the legal framework for micro to medium-sized enterprises and also for relevant incentive measures. If we look at, if we go to the next slide, if we look at governance and public administration reform in Moldova, generally, I think one of the most important developments in recent years has been its anchorage in a public administration reform strategy, the 2016 to 2020 strategy. And this is, at least in our opinion and based on the information we received, quite a well-structured and also relevant document that sets out quite a comprehensive and clear path to enhance regulatory quality and policy making. And it was also confirmed by a recent external evaluation by Transparency International that looked specifically in a project at the at this public administration reform strategy. Where we have found limits is in the action plan related to the strategy. So I think that action plan was developed more hastily with quite limited consultation with associative and the academic environment, and does not necessarily correspond to issues that are identified in the strategy. Some of the other general observations we've made is that the alignment of the public administration reform efforts with the budget process, which is very important, and also the link with the so-called Sigma principles of public administration have stagnated in Moldova recently. And also some of the methodological documents, so a sort of government manual that sets out the drafting, approval, monitoring, and evaluation of public policy document that exists in other countries that we are assessing. For example, Georgia has made quite significant efforts to develop a clear and comprehensive policy manual. It's something that was planned but is still not developed and not existent in Moldova. If we look at some of the more detailed findings now that relate to specific indicators of this pillar, our analysis shows that innovation foresight, so the practice of capturing future trends and perspective for research activities that are then incorporated or adjusted in innovation policies, are not yet integrated into innovation policy making, at least not in a systematic and continuous manner. Foresight does take place in some instances, mainly ad hoc, and it is usually tied to specific design efforts. We saw evidence of this for example, in 2030 National Development Strategy. Why is this important? Well, it means, or could potentially mean, that individual policies may not be grounded in agreed realistic assumptions from which then performance indicators follow in some fashion. Evidence-based policy making is also constrained by a relatively limited statistical picture of the innovation performance in Moldova, and often we found some evidence or found some examples where the data was available but not necessarily used in the decision-making process. Whether this was related to a lack of political will to adopt decisions that were backed by data but were not popular on the ground, or whether this was due to a lack of institutional memory, remains to be analyzed further. In our case study in the SME law, we did not find any evidence that market failure analysis or some form of comprehensive cost-benefit analysis was undertaken, but we have a specific meeting with ODIM later this afternoon. We can clarify this in a little bit more detail. One, let's say, highlight in the area of preparation of policies and laws that we found quite positive development is the introduction of regulatory impact assessment into the policy preparation process. And I've listed here on the next slide, Tatiana, some of the details, some of the history, how regulatory impact analysis has evolved in Moldova and how it's being applied. And we believe that for a number of reasons this is quite a promising endeavor. It's based on a government decision that entered into force now quite recently in October 2019. The methodology is quite clear-cut and well described and well set. And it's importantly driven by the center of government. So this regulatory impact analysis is governed by the state chancellery, which should have the necessary convening power to involve the necessary ministries to undertake this process. And it has the support of a specific secretariat that has benefited from capacity building and expertise from the World Bank, which has a very significant, let's say, experience and expertise in this in implementing regulatory impact analysis. Now, two main question marks still remain about the implementation of RIA in Moldova. One is the ability and resources of the ministries to carry out the RIA in a way that is of the right quality and of the right rigor, let's say. And We understand that the Chancellery is organizing trainings now of ministries, of civil servants, of how to conduct this, and I think this will be essential for the success of this. And the second one is kind of a, let's say, a loophole in the process, which is that if a policy draft or a legislative draft is discussed in Parliament, parliamentarians can still amend that draft at the last minute, even after it has gone through RIA. So these kind of last-minute amendments can, in a way, jeopardize the quality control, the regulatory impact analysis outcomes at the late stage. With regards to the law on SMEs, this was before RIA was introduced, so this was not something that was yet applied to that specific measure. So that's on the first sub-pillar, the preparation side. And I have a few questions that I would like to discuss with stakeholders. What are there any plans to expand the use of foresight techniques in policymaking? This can be in innovation policymaking or other areas. Second question, what is the view of stakeholders in terms of the quality of analysis supporting new policies and laws in Moldova? Are there formal obligations for policy drafting institutions that they generally comply with? For example, do ministries have to provide explanatory notes that analyze the rationale and impact of a new policy or law? And also then finally on RIA specifically, we've let's say examined the state of affairs and regarding the rolling out of RIA in different ministries. We would be interested to hear how operationally, how active this measure is and to what extent it is now being systematically applied across ministries. So I think these are questions that are relevant for most institutions, not just the ones that focus specifically on innovation policy. So it'd be interesting to hear some feedback.
Well, if referring to the preparing of any national policies or programs, then each of them obligatory has specific parts. And the first part is, of course, the re-analysis or ex-ante analysis. Usually the description of the problem and of the existing situation is included in the definition of the problem within the document itself, and additionally the ministries usually prepare an informative note which also describes the situation and the problem inside. Each of the documents have to go through specific stages before it goes to the approval. So basically when the document is prepared according to Governmental Decision 33 or 100, and it has specific parts that should be included, including the monitoring part. It's a part of the document itself. The document includes usually includes the description of the problem, also the actions that should be undertaken, the foreseen results, and of course the monitoring. After the document is being drafted, it goes to the public consultations. It goes to all viable stakeholders, and they come with their comments. Also, it's usually published on the Particip.gov.md, which is a platform to public consultations. All the comments and recommendations are being revised then and commented, like either it's taken into consideration and included in the draft document, or if it's refused, then they have to explain why it's refused and why it's not included. Then the document, if the document is being changed more than 50%, then it goes from the very beginning again, from the elaboration. If no, then it again goes to revision. And it's also been, usually the documents are also discussed within the Economic Council or intergovernmental groups to see what are the inputs from the different stakeholders. And the programs or strategies, they usually have an implementing plan, which usually includes a given period, like 2 years or 3 years implementation. And then it's revised on annual basis, and then on the period of its implementation basis. Of course, the majority of documents are mainly monitored rather than evaluated.
And maybe the ministries present would like to comment a little bit on, for example, how regulatory impact analysis is being operationalized now across different departments, and to what extent civil servants have been trained in this methodology.
Vorbim despre analiza impactului de reglementare. De regulă, actele normative elaborate de Ministerul Economiei și Infrastructurii obligatoriu trebuiau să treacă prin această etapă, analiza impactului de reglementare. Ce țin Ministerul Educației, Culturii și Cercetării, domeniile de politici pe direcții sunt foarte specifice și abia la sfârșitul anului 2019, în decembrie, am fost informați că se vor ține cursuri pe elaborarea analizei impactului de reglementare și funcționarii din cadrul diferitor direcții vor avea posibilitatea, din direcția noastră, de exemplu, o colegă deja a trecut cursul analizei impactului de reglementare.
Bună ziua, îmi spune Diana Rusu, Camera de Comerț și Industrie a Republicii Moldova, șef Direcție de Susținere și Promovare a membrii a mediului de afaceri. Grupul de lucru pentru reforma regulatorie este unul foarte activ și foarte lucrativ. Deci reuniunile au loc săptămânal în ziua de marți, deja începând după reforma componenței. Se examinează absolut toate actele, proiectele de acte normative și legislative care au un impact asupra desfășurării activității de antreprenoriat și asupra mediului de afaceri. Din grupul de lucru fac parte, practic, toate cele mai mari asociații profesioniste, așa să le spunem, asociații de business și unii reprezentanți ai guvernului, a ministerelor. La sfârșitul anului precedent a avut loc un curs de, așa se numesc, un curs de traininguri pentru specialiștii care sunt implicați în grupul de lucru, pentru membrii grupului de lucru, deci atât pentru asociațiile de afaceri cât și pentru angajații ministerelor și altor instituții publice. Și deci asta am vrut să zic, este foarte lucrativ, toate actele normative sau reglementările sau care au impact asupra mediului de afaceri sunt în mod obligatoriu examinate și se practică și procedura este foarte, foarte utilă. Mulțumesc!
Da, și eu pot să confirm lucrul acesta, fiindcă recent Agenția Națională pentru Cercetare și Dezvoltare a avut o experiență de elaborare și avizare, aprobarea analizei impactului cu privire la activitatea în cadrul parcurilor științifico-tehnologice și incubatorul de inovare. S-a lucrat cu grupul de lucru respectiv, despre care s-a menționat. Într-adevăr, este foarte lucrativ, foarte ajută la fiecare etapă, vine cu părerea și explică de ce aici așa, de ce așa și printr-un consens ajunge la un document final care a trecut prima etapă de analiză pozitivă de către expert, care a fost responsabil și deja în a doua etapă a fost avizată de către toți membrii grupului de lucru și a fost consemnat în proces verbal. Mersi.
Thank you very much. I think we can then move on to the next sub-pillar that deals with specifically policy design issues. And here I wanted to talk a little bit about a public-private consultation, which was already mentioned within the preparation, the discussions about the preparation aspects. Now, these are of course an integral part of policy making to ensure policy relevance to the market and private sector needs, and also to confirm the commitment to its implementation by relevant stakeholders. In Moldova, we found that public-private dialogue is in, let's say, the development phase. There are a number of platforms for this type of dialogue. The Economic Council to the Prime Minister was mentioned. Also the creation of specific working groups on specific topics. But in some areas, the involvement of the business sector is still limited, and part of this may also be explained by the frequent changes in government. It does take time for this dialogue to be set up and to become operational and comprehensive. What we observed is that the voice of various business associations is becoming stronger. So if we look at, for example, the bigger business associations, the European Business Association, AmCham also, they have, we found, quite good advocacy and lobbying strategies that have been able to push for certain points on the governmental agenda and different topics. And of course, there's also a close partnership with the Chamber of Commerce, which we just heard about. Another observation is that, and I think this was alluded to, is that ministries are obliged to publish the draft decisions well before the adoption by the Cabinet of Ministers, and I think they even have to publish a note on their web page at the moment when they are initiating the work on a specific policy document. So there is, let's say, transparency in terms of accessing the relevant information about new policy developments. However, we also found instances where quite important documents, so for example the fiscal budgetary policy for the next year, is adopted very quickly, so within a week or two, which of course then makes the consultation process a mere formality. If we look at interministerial consultations, these happen, as we heard, throughout the day quite routinely in Moldova through the establishment of working groups. One issue that remains is conflict resolution. So they're not conflict resolution is not established at the high administrative and political level. So that limits the ability for different entities to reach constructive compromises when there's disagreement between, for example, the content of a policy draft. The same is true for forward planning mechanisms between the government and the parliament. So these are not yet fully developed. And as I said earlier, we have then instances and cases where the policy is changed within the parliament at the last minute without consultation, without the due diligence that the process like RIA should be establishing. With regards to our specific case study, the SME law, I think this was quite a positive example of public-private consultation. It ticks several, I would say, good practice boxes. It was quite comprehensive. I've listed here, where you can't see on the next slide, Tatiana, the different entities and institutions that were involved. We noted that the records of these consultations were shared and also published, and also that there was evidence that suggestions from these consultations were taken on board. So, for example, one government body proposed to introduce in the law the distinction of young entrepreneurs, and this was subsequently included. So we found that this specific working group that dealt with the creation and drafting of this law is actually, let's say, quite an open, functional, and transparent one. And this was also, I think, mentioned earlier by different stakeholders at this roundtable. So a few questions. We don't have much time, but again, these are quite general in nature, and I hope that we can get a few more responses to get a bit of a flavor of how, let's say, the design process functions here in Moldova. First question: is the policy-making process open and inclusive enough? Do non-governmental stakeholders feel like their voices are being heard, which non-governmental stakeholders are risked to be potentially favored or even potentially excluded. So this is a question that I think maybe some of the non-governmental stakeholders could respond to. And then maybe the third question is quite pertinent as well. How are interministerial consultations regulated and generally conducted across the government, and how do you deal with divergencies in opinions on specific policy drafts, their content, for example?
Camera de Comerț și Industrie. Vreau să răspund la prima întrebare un pic ca unul din elaboratorii cadrului legislativ și normativ pentru IMM-uri și ulterior din calitatea mea de parte a procesului de consultare a actelor normative și legislative, dezvoltarea mediului de afaceri. Da, toate actele normative, deci din practica anterioară pot să vă zic că noi întotdeauna am remis tuturor asociațiilor de business care sunt relevante actului normativ specific sau, de exemplu, atunci când a fost elaborată legea cu privire la IMM-uri și strategia de dezvoltare a IMM-urilor, am remis tuturor asociațiilor de business solicitarea de a veni cu păreri, opinii și propuneri de îmbunătățire. Sigur că toate modificările au fost luate în considerație sau în deplină măsură sau parțial, fiindcă în primul rând este cadrul legal care le afectează direct activitatea. Acum, în calitate de partea ca stakeholder, spunem, primim la consultare toate strategiile, inclusiv de dezvoltare a industrializării țării, care, iată, consultarea va fi pe data de 24 ianuarie și la care suntem invitați. Noi am fost parte ca asociație de business a grupului de lucru pentru elaborarea acestei strategii. Am venit cu propuneri și au fost luate în considerare. Deci nu doar aici, la strategia Moldova 2030, care a fost de 2 ori, dacă țineți minte, colegii din instituții cunosc la consultări. Deci de 2 ori am venit cu propuneri și de fiecare dată au fost luate în considerare, în special propunerea de a include subiectul de specializare inteligentă, smart specialization și multe altele. Deci ca asociație, din partea asociațiilor de business, și spun părții reprezentantul sectorului privat, da, noi suntem consultați și da, ne iau în considerare opiniile cu care noi venim. Mersi.
Thank you very much. And maybe just to close on the design subpillar, a few words from the Ministry of Education, maybe on how interministerial consultations are structured, how they're conducted, how you deal with divergencies in opinions on the content.
De asemenea, din practica noastră la Ministerul Educației, Culturii și Cercetării, care acum facem 2 ani de zile de când a fost creată direcția, toate proiectele de acte normative sunt supuse avizării de către ministerele care au tangență cu obiectul de reglementare. Obiecțiile, observațiile, propunerile celorlalte ministere se studiază, fie se acceptă și se introduc modificările respective în proiectul de act normativ. În cazul în care nu se acceptă, se vine cu argumentare. De ce nu poate fi acceptată propunerea dată? După prima avizare, proiectul de act normativ este transmis pentru avizare repetată. Dacă ministerele care au făcut obiecții și propuneri care nu au fost acceptate continuă să-și susțină poziția, Legea prevede că urmează să fie creat un grup de lucru pentru a ajunge la un consens în privința reglementării. Bine, grupul de lucru poate fi creat fizic, se poate întruni în ședințe sau aceasta tot poate fi discutat prin intermediul e-mail-urilor, telefonic și altele. Dar ideea este că oricum se ajunge la un consens.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the last two sub-pillars that I've merged into one, and some of the more specific questions I think we'll discuss tomorrow this afternoon with Odim on the implementation of the law, or rather the application enforcement. So I think this specific SME law, given that 98% of companies are SMEs in Moldova, was quite necessary and overdue. And I think the general, let's say, impression is that this law succeeded with its goal of establishing the legal framework for micro, small, and medium enterprises, as well as in establishing the state support measures for the creation and development of small enterprises. The terms defined in the law have since been used within other government decisions or policy documents developed by central and local administrations, and also several funding instruments targeting SMEs were developed in order to implement the provisions from the law since it was adopted. If we look at the issue of amendments of policies and laws, these are still very frequent in Moldova, so about 40% of laws usually undergo initiatives to amend them within just 1 year of adoption. And this high share of amendments to new laws indicates that there is still a problem with the quality of the legal drafting, and this in turn has a negative impact on the consistency and clarity of the legal framework in Moldova. And if we look at the evaluation and assessment processes, and this is something that we've encountered in pretty much all the other 5 countries, is that monitoring does take place, but it is mostly output focused with little systemic linkage to policy design, and also the absence, and this is something you mentioned, of impact level analysis, and also then a lack of consistent use of this data from implemented policies to design and adapt future policies. And with the SME law specifically, the only relevant activity we found, but again, we can discuss this later on, was in 2018, there was a parliamentary commission on economy, budget and finances, which organized a hearing on the results of the implementation of this law. I think I'll leave it at this. It's just about 1 o'clock, and in terms of the questions, these were quite specific and targeted at ODIM, and I look forward to discussing them with Oksana and her colleagues this afternoon. So thank you very much for your contributions, and we may be in touch in the coming weeks for a few final clarifications. Thank you.
I would like to, just 1 minute please. I would like to express my sincere appreciation for all the participants, especially for UNECE, and for all the participants for the presence, for the participation in our roundtable. Thank you very much. All your opinion is very important for us, especially now when the field of science and innovation is in the process of reformation. That's why I very sincere say you thank you very much. Thank you.
You know, also from our side, we're very grateful that so many of you have shown up, and for the contributions that you have made, both in the run-up, both during the analysis itself and also in this meeting. I especially liked some of the questions that came up, which are actually very important, such as the comment on is it necessarily something that Moldova should do in this stage to increase the actual number of graduates, because it is an essential question. We sometimes see in many countries that we very blindly go ahead and say, yes, we need an SME agency, and yes, we need more graduates, and yes, we need this and that, without necessarily thinking about, is this the best first step? Is this the most binding constraint that we need to address in Moldova? And then other participants very correctly said that, pointed in the direction that at least at the moment, the constraint might be around the quality of the education, the focus on the different areas of specialization, as opposed to the needs of the private sector, the needs or the needs of the labor market. I think we see a similar issue when it comes to R&D spending. Of course, it's very important to retain some of the legacy that you inherited from communist time, with a very strong focus on both applied and basic research, where Moldova and many of the countries that we're working with is still actually an outlier compared to other countries at the same level of development. At the same time, it's important for us to think about how do we actually spend this money in the best possible way, because remember, in developed countries, most R&D spending comes from the private sector. So what we want to kind of trigger through this kind of funding is a dynamic whereby the private sector, maybe with some seed funding or with some collaboration, finds it useful to also engage in these activities. And it might be that not substantially more funding is public funding is necessary at this point. It might make more sense to look into how can we actually use this funding to trigger positive dynamics. And this is exactly what we're trying to cover both in the review and in the IPO process. We're trying to look, and that's why Jacob's pillar is particularly important in this respect. How do you develop policies? Why do you develop policies? What do you want to achieve? And especially, what kind of mechanisms and incentives do you have in place to know whether what you're doing is achieving results, not only at the output level, but at the impact level? That's much easier said than done, but you can summarize it in one basic paradigm, and that is try things out, but stop what's not working and try something else. And if we can help you slightly redesign how you develop and how you evaluate these policies in that direction, then we would be, of course, also personally extremely happy, and I think it would be very good for a promising country like Moldova as well. So we appreciate that. I think in terms of the next step on the IPO side, we will have a regional meeting in the beginning of March, where we'll present some of the initial results, and then we'll also discuss those at our committee meeting, which will be at the end of March, where we hope also Moldova will be represented. And on the review side, we're starting the process now. The next step is to decide 3 topics for these in-depth chapters, and we've had a couple of ideas, so we will discuss those with some of you during this mission, and then come back to you with 3 concrete proposals, and then we'll come back for a major research mission, or maybe even 2 research missions, depending on what makes sense. I think what did we say in the presentation about July or third quarters, and we should be able to at least present some additional some initial results, if not have the entire review by the end of the year. So we look forward to that. Too. Thank you very much again for your participation and for organization, and also to my colleagues for their hard work.